In Lady Windermere's Fan, Oscar Wilde wrote that a cynic is a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. This week's guest on Here Comes Pod is football's fan, but also knows both its price and its value. Kieran Maguire is a lecturer at Liverpool University's Management School, where he teaches the football industry's MBA, and has come to be known as the UK's leading expert on football finance. He's also the co-host of the Price of Football podcast, the must-listen-to source of information for anyone interested in the business of professional football. Kieran discusses his early forays into football, adult entertainment, accountancy, and ultimately academia, the origin stories of the price of football, the impact of the financial missteps that led to the demise of Bury, Project Big Picture and the Super League, and how covering these shifts in football's tectonic plates has become all-consuming. Enjoy. Hi Kieran, welcome to the pod.
Thanks very much, Danny. Looking forward to this.
Excellent. Great to have you on board. I always like to start with a fun question just to kick things off. And my question to you is this. If a billionaire asked you to pick one football club in the world for them to buy, which one would you choose for them and why?
If it was only a billionaire, that would rule out sort of 7 or 8 clubs. So I think I would probably go for Aston Villa. I think it's just on the right side of the price. You could still have a bit of fun money left over to invest. Big city, big fan base, sleeping giant, plenty of history and heritage. So that's where I go. If money was unlimited, I'd go elsewhere. But for just $1 billion, it would have to be Villa.
Okay, very good. Well, that's a leading club from the history of English league football, and we will mainly refer to English league football, but recognising that football in the United Kingdom does stretch to other countries within the United Kingdom. So I think I have to say that. But that's a Midlands club. And on The Price of Football, which is the podcast that you co-present, you often reveal deep roots in both the south and the north of England, in fact. So how and when did you make the journey from the Elephant and Castle, which I think is where you were born, or that's where you were based very early on, and down from there to the south coast of England?
Well, I was born in the Elephant, so I should have been a Millwall fan, except my dad wasn't interested in football, and his brother, Terry, was a big football fan, was a big Millwall fan. But this would have been end of the 60s, start of the 70s, when I started to get interested in football myself. And my mum would not let me go to the old den. Uncle Terry would have looked after me, but he ran with the crew, shall we say. So I think I might have cramped his style a bit, but he was always brilliant to me. So I didn't really follow a football team. And then my dad worked for American Express in London, and they moved their European headquarters from London down to Brighton. So all of a sudden, we had this football club on our doorstep, as far as I was concerned. I was just a ragged-arsed kid from South London, football mad, but didn't really have any identity in terms of football. So I started going, would catch the bus, would go along with one of the neighbours, or just go along by myself. And that started the relationship.
And Uncle Terry then is a real person. Sometimes you think he's a kind of a made-up character.
No. He is genuine. My old man had 3 brothers and a sister. Typical Irish migrant family. Awful lot of us in the house. Uncle Terry, he wasn't quite the villain that we make him out to be on the show, but he was a rough diamond.
And did you ever, in your time in the northwest, did you ever have a particular affinity with one team? I always think that if you go to University of Manchester, which is what I did as well, that you end up picking one of the big Manchester clubs.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first matches I ever saw was the 1968 European Cup final. So that was iconic, and in those days, the whole country would get behind the domestic team in the competition. It wasn't the tribal nature of football that we have these days. So I did have a bit of a soft spot for Manchester United. I saw Gary Birtles and Remy Moses both signing on the pitch. And I went along to a few matches. Okay, you wanted to say that you've been in the Stretford End. So I went along to a few matches in the Stretford End, and it was different. It was lively, to put it mildly, but I just didn't feel a connection. So by the time of sort of my second year, I'd watch Brighton away matches if they were in the north, or if there was a train link. By sort of my second year at university, I tended to go to Main Road more often, simply because I'd met some mates who were City fans, and there was a fun factor to City. Yeah, they were the genuine Keystone Cops of football. So I guess my affection in the Northwest is for City because I'd seen them so often, and certainly when my kids were born, and I effectively stopped going to watch Brighton because it just wasn't the right thing to do. I'd be going to Main Road once a fortnight with my mates, and so I guess they sort of became a proxy for the team that I wanted to watch.
So you were in Manchester for Manchester University, and you graduated with a degree in economics in 1983. And you started, your first job was with Grant Thornton. Were you always destined to be an accountant?
I think the family always wanted me to be an accountant because, I come from a family of bricklayers and farmers, so I was the first of the generation to go to university. I was always very good at mental arithmetic and sums, as they were in those days. So therefore, the logical thing, as far as everybody was concerned, well, Kieran should become an accountant. And I turned those skills to good use when I was out with Uncle Terry, because he had a finance related job, I think is the politest way of describing it. And in those days, I had a pretty well, no, I had a photographic memory. So I could remember outstanding sums and payments to and from in an industry, because his area of finance wasn't that keen on keeping detailed paperwork. So I actually was quite useful for that. But when I left university, I didn't actually have a job, and a mate of mine was going to a kibbutz, and he got me a job. This was the summer of '83. I ended up running an adult establishment in Brighton. And I couldn't tell my mum, because coming from an Irish family, if she thought, I'd be working for the devil incarnate if I told her I was running a sex shop. So I used to tell her I was out looking for work. And then I got this job, or went for this interview with Grant Thornton. And I remember I was gutted. I'd take a 50% pay cut. I was on 150 quid a week, at sort of running this emporium. And I dropped down to 70 quid a week to do my training contract to become a chartered accountant.
So what then took you into academia, first at ATC and then at Manchester Metropolitan University from 2002 to 2013?
Well, I became a dad, and we discovered that our son was autistic. And I had quite a demanding job, an inflexible job, and it just wasn't working because you get phone calls from the school where you had to drop everything, or you'd end up having to go to hospital. And the disciplined world of the private sector and the demanding world isn't geared up for things like that. So I knew some of the guys at Man Met, and I'd done a bit of sort of freelance teaching for them when they'd been short of staff. And I was just talking about the family issues one day, thinking, what on earth do I do? And one of the guys there said, well, come and work here. It's much more flexible, in terms of school holidays. You can work from home. If you're not teaching, you can do your research work or whatever else, with preparation work from home, and so on. So again, I took a big pay cut. This is a story of my life, really. Sort of. So I took a big pay cut, sold the car. So I was cycling sort of 10, 12 miles to work and 10 to 12 miles back. But in the broader scheme of things, your parental responsibilities are far more significant, and it allowed me to be there for my lad as and when was needed.
And then how did you end up specializing in football finance and football related academia?
Well, there's a sort of a couple of sliding doors moments, or just pragmatism. If you're teaching in Manchester, and Manchester's a football mad city, and probably about half the students that I was teaching were local lads, local lasses. So how do you engage? If I've got a 3 hour lecture at 9 o'clock on a Monday or a Tuesday morning, how do I get these people interested in cash flow, in how to account for assets, how to look for red flags in businesses, and so on? I use football. So, whilst I'm nominally supposed to be teaching them about sort of listed companies, so, should we be focusing on Vodafone or Marks and Spencers or BP? I utilized football clubs as a Trojan horse to teach the fundamentals of finance. And the fundamentals of finance are universal. It doesn't matter the nature of the industry. You have a couple of tweaks that are sort of industry specific. So I started to sort of build up a portfolio of knowledge in relation to the football industry, and didn't really do much with it. And then I was always on the make. I was always trying to top up my earnings. So in the summer holidays, I started moonlighting, and I started moonlighting on Canary Wharf and Wall Street, teaching finance courses to investment bankers who were transitioning out of university and into the banking profession, and that was fine. But on one day, I was teaching a bunch of associates at a particular bank in relation to some accounting nerdiness, and it got to lunchtime, which was 1 p.m. UK time. Went out for a stroll, grabbed myself a sandwich, walked back, and there were these two huge bouncers on the door of the bank, and they put the shutters down. And I'm going, it's a bit strange. Went back into the class. They said, what's all this? And they said, oh yeah, one of our clients is involved in a leverage buyout in the sports industry, and we're just a little bit concerned there could be a negative reaction from the fans. So I'm going, okay, well, when's the deal being announced? Deal being announced 9 a.m. New York time, so 2 p.m. UK time, and it was the Glazer family acquiring Manchester United. So massive story in football, because Manchester United, we didn't have clicks in those days, but Manchester United sells newspapers. And I thought nothing of it. Yeah, we went through the deal, we had a chat through the deal, and fine. But it's all fairly standard stuff. And then I was catching the train back from London to Manchester. The BBC had phoned up the university press office and say, can somebody explain this in short words? And the press office says, well, we've got this person who's supposed to be teaching proper finance, but all he does is talk about football all the time. Give him a go. So I got this phone call, on the train. Will I come into BBC studio the following day and talk about the nature of the deal? So I did it, and I was sort of very starry eyed. You're getting on the BBC sofa. This is. I'm phoning up my mum and all this type of stuff, and and the wife and kids are watching it on the telly back home. And I went through it, and I didn't make an idiot of myself, and I didn't use long words, and I've always prided myself as a teacher, and that's what I am, is that I'm good at making things understandable. You don't need technical. It doesn't matter what the subject is. If you can't make it understandable, then it doesn't matter how good you are in terms of your academic knowledge. So that was that. And then on the back of that, the next time a football finance story came in, it was BBC Radio, BBC TV, and things started to just become a little bit more regular, but nothing near where we are at present. I mean, I'm doing 800 interviews a year at present for TV, radio, podcasts, magazines, newspapers. So it's a topic which has exploded, and I just happened to be in the eye of the hurricane when it exploded, to mix metaphors.
And you now actually have a specific career teaching that at the University of Liverpool. And interesting, what kind of topics do you cover? Is it the same sort of thing, teaching finance, but using football as an example, or does it go deeper than that? And where do your students end up going from a career point of view?
Well, yeah, I was headhunted by Liverpool. I can probably say that now. You're not officially allowed to do that in the world of academia, but I got a call and they said we've got a football industries MBA, which has got a finance section to it. We've heard you on the radio. Do you fancy coming? Or do you fancy doing it? And I'm going, yeah, too right. Yeah, this is putting two and two together and getting five as far as enjoyment for my concern, because I don't have to. I don't have to duck and dive and pretend that I'm teaching proper finance. So they approached me. It was also, and this is not any disrespectful viewpoints of Manchester Met, because I loved my time there. I genuinely loved teaching. It was a Russell Group university. So again, there was from a professional standing point of view, there's slightly more kudos, and there was a wee bit more money as well. So there were
Not,
lots of.
not a pay cut this time.
Not a pay cut. No, no, no. This is
You broke the chain.
that's right. And about time too, I was saying to myself, especially my wife, I was saying. So I went across there and I started off teaching standard MBA, but the football MBA, and I was teaching sort of standard undergraduate courses as well. The football MBA stuff, that seemed to go down reasonably well as far as student satisfaction was concerned. And by then, the subject matter was increasing in awareness. Again, sort of strange sliding doors moments in life. I was running the Dublin Marathon, and I took my knee out, so I ended up, in hospital, operations, couldn't walk for 6 or 7 weeks. So what am I going to do? So I built up this huge spreadsheet in terms of I'll just go and look at every single set of accounts since the Premier League started. So built that up as a sort of as a portfolio of data, which meant I could start to quote it and so on. And I'm a huge admirer of Kieran O'Connor, who people know as the Swiss Ramble. He is the number one guy. He is the guru of football finance. And I guess I was trying to be a bit mini me, but he doesn't like doing media work because he's got a proper job in Switzerland. Whereas you put a microphone within 100 yards of me, and I'm there like I'm a bit there like Roadrunner. I'll talk about the subject matter. So we're doing more and more sports related courses at the university, which suits me fine. So we've had dedicated courses for horse racing industry. We got an arrangement with the Professional Cricketers Association, and then sort of other football institutions start to come along. So League Managers Association, the PFA, and so on. So it sort of built up a work of football, and that allows me to go into the football specific issues, such as the relatively narrow set of revenue choices that you have, accounting for footballers, which is great fun, and so everybody's become an expert on it over the course of the last 2 or 3 months because of what we've seen in relation to half a dozen clubs selling their academy players, and amortization was trending on Twitter, and I felt such a high when that took place. So all of these things have sort of worked out for me, and I just sort of drifted along. There wasn't a book on football finance, so I wrote one. And then the book became a bestseller, much to the annoyance of my wife, because I gave all the royalties away to the local food bank.
Amazing.
No,
Amazing.
not amazing. No. Well, yeah, when I wrote it, I thought a traditional academic book. I've got 150 students at the time. 20% of them will buy it. That's 30. That's 30 copies sold. The library will buy another 10. A few other libraries might buy some. So I might sell 100 copies a year, and you're on a pound a book royalty. And when it sold 20,000, it's good news for people in far more need and in far worse circumstances than myself.
Exactly.
But as my wife said, that's a few nice holidays.
Well, in the long run, I think you would probably be able to to trump that because along came the price of football. So how did that come about? And has the popularity of the podcast been a massive surprise?
Yeah, that came about because I used to regularly appear on a BBC show called Wake Up to Money. And that was on Radio 5 Live, and that's between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. And I think I was the only guest because I'm a morning person, and I'm also a bit like Tigger. I'm irritatingly cheerful. So I'd simply say to them, I'll come into the studio. Yeah, it's a lot easier to read an interview from having some sort of facial and physical contact if you're there. So I got to know the presenters of the show, and one of the presenters, Guy Kilty, then approached me to say, I don't want to be doing Wake Up to Money for the next 10 or 20 years. I've got a young family myself. So I'm thinking of setting up a podcast business. I'd like you to present the show and I'll manage it. And we had a chat about revenues, costs, and stuff because I'm as a financial person I'm extremely cautious. And I said I've got a couple of reservations. I had a lot of reservations, but I didn't think it would work on me just becoming a lecturer on a podcast because that's what it would have been. Here's 6 stories. I'm now going to talk to you about blah 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 blah. So I said it would be far better on a conversational basis, a bit like Mel and Griff when they used to have the two blokes at the pub. I'm not a funny person, but by accounting lecturer standards, I'm mildly amusing, and that's a particularly low bar, Danny. It has to be said. So we had a chat and we said, okay, let's try to get somebody who can sort of be the inquiring bloke in the pub. And originally it was going to be Justin Morehouse because he's based in Manchester and I was living in Manchester. And also at the same time, I was going through a bit of a midlife crisis. And I don't know why, but I wanted to come back to Brighton. And I still can't explain why. So I persuaded Gail, my wife, to consider it, and she loves it down in Sussex. She loves Brighton. It's a wacky city. So I persuaded her to go ahead with that, and I said to Gail, I've got to be honest, I'm moving down south. In which case, meeting up with Justin once a week wasn't going to work. So he said, "Do you know anybody else?" And I said, "Well, who I'd like to pitch to, because I remember Kevin from Match of the Day 2, from Channel 4 cricket, from Goodwood. He was always sort of that slightly baffled bloke who asked questions. But more importantly than that, when Brighton nearly went bust in 1997, he's a Palace fan. He hates Brighton. He will tell you left, right, and centre how much he hates Brighton. But we were desperate and we were doing anything to raise money for the club. And this Crystal Palace supporting comedian came down to Brighton and did a benefit gig for Brighton Hove Albion. And I thought, these are the type of values that I hold, I hold dear. So I just approached him on Twitter and said, "Can I have your email address? I've got business. We've got a presenting idea." And I and producer Guy, we met up, and I could tell instantly that Kevin's reaction was, "Why on earth did I agree to this meeting?" Because there's me being a dweeby nerd, and I didn't tell him I supported Brighton because I at the back of my mind I thought if this all goes wrong, which it probably will do, it's probably best he doesn't find out that I'm a Brighton fan. So we met up. We initially recorded in Soho at sort of some professional studios there. And again, the nerd in me is thinking, I'm sure this isn't free. So this has got to be paid for at some point in time. The first couple of episodes, I wasn't nervous, but I wasn't over my subject in a way I would want to be these days. And we were originally targeted by Guy to say, can you come up with 20 to 30 minutes worth of conversation? Which we did easily because at the time we just lost Berry, and I was incandescent I was furious with the EFL for the way that they expelled Bury. I was furious with Steve Dale, who had destroyed Bury because he was trying to monetize the real estate there. I was furious with Stuart Day, who had sold the club to. So I was sort of I was on sort of evangelical at the time, but we were starting to pick up a few stories, and I at the back of my mind, I thought we've probably got enough material for 3 or 4 weeks, and then football finance, who's going to be interested in this, and we're going to run out of content. But the content kept coming, and I know we got really excited after about 6 weeks when we'd hit 10,000 downloads, but the feedback was positive, and the success of the show since then. We've done way more than 500 shows. I think we're on something like 16 million downloads now. We have people phoning us up to who want to come on the show, which completely knocks me for six. Who wants to talk to a teetotal chartered accountant who was such a bad accountant he gave up to become a teacher? It was, but we appear to have found a niche in the industry, and we treat everybody with respect. And tomorrow, for example, we've got the chief executive of Southend United on the show. To me, he's just as important as the chief executive of Manchester United or Spurs or Barcelona, because he's representing the community of Southend in a positive way. So yeah, we're absolutely. I'm particularly astounded, and I think Kevin also thought that the show would die on its arse very, very quickly. But I'm a huge fan of Kevin, so to be able to work with him for me is, it's pennies from heaven.
And what have you learned over the course of making the show in terms of what works on the show and areas to focus on?
We've learnt to try to rein it in, to try to be objective, to be prepared to take on the establishment as well. I get told off quite regularly by parties in the industry. And I'll say, if you do something good, I'll give you praise, and if you do something bad, I'll criticize. And yeah, I'm a nobody, and they say, well, yeah, but you got people listen to you. So no, I'm still a nobody, whether they listen to me or not. Yeah, my kids listen to me. I'm a nobody to them. I can assure you, except when they want money. So in terms of what works, there's a few in jokes on the show. There's a few sort of running gags, such as one day we're going to get a BAFTA, one day we're going to beat the Guardian Football Weekly for the Football Podcast Awards. I think we've also learned that to be able to do the show well, you've got to do an awful lot of background work. So it might come across as shambolic and amateurish. I don't know. I don't listen to it. The last thing I want to do is to hear my own voice, because all I hear are the ums, the ahs, the words that are repeated, the words which I mispronounced, because I'm not interested in the subject matter, because I already know the subject matter. It is a show where I think Kevin's role is underappreciated by the audience, because he is absolutely fantastic as an interviewer. He knows when to shut me up. He knows when to ask a follow-up question. He knows when to take the mickey out of me or to take the mickey out of the subject, and when to show it due respect. He's an absolutely brilliant broadcaster, and I'm full of admiration for him. And I've learned as a presenter how to become a better presenter, which is then reflected as far as I'm concerned, in my day job as well.
Yeah, so that was something that I was interested in, is how the show has impacted your personal and professional life, and also as a football fan as well. So how has it changed things?
On a personal level, it has become quite evangelical. I genuinely do get up at 5:30 every morning and go through all of the football finance stories. I've got Google alerts, I've got Companies House alerts. I don't think anybody else in the country, between the hours of 11:30 p.m. and midnight on a Monday night, would be summarising the accounts of Cove Rangers in the Scottish lower leagues. But to me, it's an interesting story. And my wife says, it's probably just you, Kieran, but there's far worse things I could be looking at on the internet than Company's House late at night. So yeah, I think she's ridiculously tolerant. Um, it does take up too much time. I've not got a correct work life balance, and I feel really bad about that. I've got grandchildren. I've got a wife who I adore. We don't spend enough time together, so I do feel bad about that. At the same time, I'm sort of addicted to the subject. So that, so on a personal level, there has been a price to pay. I've put on far too much weight. I don't get enough exercise because I will be on spreadsheets tonight until 10 or 11 p.m. because I've just thought of something which I thought, oh, I've not got that. If I put all these figures together, I might get some interesting numbers. And they're interest to nobody but me until you put them out on Twitter, and sometimes they bite, and sometimes that they die. On a professional level, the university seems to like me. I bring in around about £3 million a year of publicity, but according to the press office, and I try to be professional and objective in my analysis and commentary, even though I might have an opinion myself. But that's part of being professional. So that's good. In terms of impacting my day to day, it's all consuming, and that's good in a way. Blokes are obsessive. It's better than collecting panini cards. But as far as my relationship with football is concerned, and this is possibly the only downside, I've fallen out of love with the game. I still watch Brighton home and away, but I remember we were at Forest away last season. Um, we were down to 10 men. Oh, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Lewis Dunk called Anthony Taylor a bald twat and got sent off. And I think this was the first time a player had been sent off for foul and abusive language for about 16 years. So we were winning 3-1. Then they got a goal, pulled it back to 3-2. We were down to 10 men and we survived and we won 3-2. And my friend who had gone with everyone else going cart with turned to me and says, "You've not celebrated anything during this match." And I thought, he's absolutely right. Because my relationship with the industry has turned into an analytical one, a forensic one. The joy and the love of football, to a certain extent, has had to pay a price for that, and that's the thing which I miss most of all, because football's all about memories. Football's all about communal experiences, and I've had some fantastic ones this season because Brighton have played in Europe for the first time, and I can say that I've been to Rome, I've been to Amsterdam, I've been to Athens, but the football itself has left me cold. I went to the finals at the Euros. I watched England play Spain. At the end of it, walked away and pretty poor match. Bit disappointed. Just move on. And sort of in my head, I've got what stories I've got for the podcast this week. And so that's I guess that's my biggest regret, because you find that there are so many unpleasant aspects to the industry. There are so many self-serving people, and there's some fantastic ones as well. At an operational level, at a staff level, I'm so proud to be a football fan.
So you mentioned that on the first show, the demise of Bury was a big topic, and also in April 21 we had the Super League fiasco. Were these really the seminal moments over the course of the lifetime of the podcast, and have they both, in slightly different ways, one at the top of the game, one at the sort of lower end of the game, have they shaped your approach, you think, to the world of football finance?
Yeah, they've certainly had a huge impact. We had a ready audience, I guess, for the Bury story, because at the time I was living in Manchester. I was going to Bury Town Hall. I got to know the MPs. I got to know some prospective buyers. So I had a lot of material to start off with, and that got an initial positive reaction, because instead of getting 2 minutes on Five Live or 60 seconds on Sky Sports, and that's not a criticism of those organisations. Look, it's Bury, and if you're a Bury fan, it's a crucial element of your life. But on the wider scale of game of things, it's not going to register very much. So all of a sudden, we could do 20 minutes on a topic, and that became important. And then as far as the Super League was concerned, and also Project Big Picture, because both of those, I started to build up a sort of networking relationship with journalists, because as an academic, people think I know a lot more than I actually do. But if you say that such and such from Liverpool University, that's got a certain degree of weight and gravitas, as opposed to, Joe from down the street. And that's not being disrespectful to Joe from down the street. So I'd been sent Project Big Picture, and I was sent sort of the Super League précis on the days that they were released, or just before they were released in some circumstances. And therefore, I was able to do all of my homework. So by the time those stories broke, I was all over them. And therefore, I was able to take a backward step, especially in respect of Big Picture and Super League, and to do a business focused assessment and leave the amazing work. I mean, what Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher and others did in that 24 hours of Super League, without, I think, their response, we would have Super League today. But I allowed them to sort of be the torch bearers, and I was sort of backing them up through a financial lens. And I was able to, both schemes were incredibly arrogantly put together with not very much homework. So, as somebody that writes exams for a living, I was able to take it apart line by line, bit by bit, as if I was deconstructing a student assignment, and that helped me, and I think it helped the people who were opposed to the scheme as well, because the nerdy academic wasn't just angry because these six clubs were trying to steal football for their own ends or for the benefit of their owners, but there were repercussions for the whole industry.
Yeah, I can imagine Daniel Levy getting a note to say could do better as his work was evaluated. English professional football is a sport, it's a business, and a community and cultural asset. Can it survive in its current form with these inherent tensions and so many loss-making clubs, or do you think these characteristics need to be diluted for the game to survive?
I think there are both business issues and community issues, which ultimately cannot be resolved. Manchester United is one of the top 10 sporting brands of all sports on the planet. For Manchester United to have to play all of its games at Old Trafford, for Manchester United to have to share TV revenues with other clubs, for Manchester United to have to play in a 20-team Premier League, so therefore it's got to play Brighton, and it's got to play Bournemouth, and it's got to play Wolverhampton Wanderers. That's not good for bottom line. So I can understand why owners want to take the game in a different direction. They don't get football. They don't get why people fall in love at the age of 7 or 8 with this incredibly unpredictable, heaving mass of humanity that goes to a football match. I mean, fans turn an inert piece of real estate into a living, breathing organism. If they are fans, if they are tourists, they go there and they do selfies, and it's not the same. But I think there is an existential threat for the game as we know it. There's also a case for saying, if people want to break away, let them break away. But they can't cherry pick. They can't be a domestic team and a Super League team just because it suits them. So I think we are approaching a period of time where there will be some fundamental change as far as the sport is concerned, because Manchester United's rivals and Spurs' rivals aren't Accrington Stanley, and they aren't Barrow. They are Barcelona, they are Real Madrid, they are Bayern Munich. And there is a business case for saying, let them go off and do their own thing, and then let the rest of football. And I think that you'd need a significant transitional period of time. Let the rest of football become acclimatized to being the domestic game, and see where we go from there. And I'll be heartbroken if it happens, because I'm old enough to remember Derby County, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, Blackburn Rovers, Leeds United, Everton, all of these clubs winning the equivalent of the Premier League and doing it on merit. And football is no longer based on merit. It is now based very much on who's got the biggest checkbook, who's got the biggest front of shirt sponsorship deal and so on.
So one consequence of the collapse of Berry and the European Super League was the momentum for a football regulator. And I think you've been fairly extensive in covering that and an advocate for that. The focus of the regulatory regime seems to be more in the direction of the owners and league administrators. Should that focus and the powers of the regulator be extended to cover some of the other key constituencies in football, like players and broadcasters, to preserve the long-term survival of the professional game?
I think that's a fascinating question. My concern is that FIFA explicitly say that government interference in an individual country could constitute losing your FIFA membership. So what we have at present in terms of the proposals, which is looking at individual stakeholder groups, but the focus very much is on owners, is on financial common sense, as opposed to the more emotive issues of ticket prices, kick-off times, appalling away shirt, and so on. I'm more in the light touch territory when it comes to the regulator. Football has survived without a regulator to date. As an entertainment medium, it's been spectacularly successful in the form of the Premier League. But that has come at a cost. 19 out of 20 clubs in the Premier League losing money on an operational level in 22-23. The only club that made a profit was West Ham, and that's partly due to the fact that the London Stadium deal is the best signing of football clubs ever made in the history of the game. So I don't think the government regulator, or the independent regulator, as it should be, of course, should overreach itself, because it will only come back to bite you in the bum if that happens. And could the regulator, in its proposed form, prevent Ron Martin at Southend, prevent Dai Yonga at Reading, Gauchon Lai at West Bromwich Albion? I'm not sure that they could. So all I think it can do is two things. First of all, it can turn the dial down, so fewer clubs get into that situation. And I think secondly, if you are, for want of a better phrase, a wrong un, if you're a person of ill thought intent towards the football industry, you might think, I'll go elsewhere and I'll run a basketball club or a rugby club. And that's my concern, because we're losing basketball clubs and we're losing rugby union clubs due to poor ownership. But the selfish part of me says these people were bad people to begin with, as long as they keep away from football.
Finally, I always like to finish with a fun question about media. And so, if you were planning a trip to see Brighton play their first league game in America, in an American stadium, because the Premier League has now finally decided that US cities can host English Premier League matches, and so you had a long journey ahead of you to get to that home game. Which football-themed film, book, not your own, unfortunately, song, and podcast, again, not your own, would you take with you for the journey?
The film would be Escape to Victory. Any film involving the Second World War and John Walk has to be a must, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of song, it would be World in Motion by New Order. One of the reasons I went to Manchester University, because I've been a huge fan of the Manchester music scene. If I had to choose between music and football, I choose football. So I choose music in a heartbeat. I love music. I love the Manchester music scene, Joy Division, the Smiths, the Fall, and New Order, and so on. In terms of a book, it would be Fever Pitch. What Nick Hornby did was help transform football from being a pariah industry, a pariah sport, into one which has become modified. It has become geriatric to a certain extent. It has also expanded in terms of the faces that I see at matches, which I think is good. Podcast, I'd go with the Guardian Football Weekly, because every year the price of football is up for the best football podcast award, along with the Guardian Football Weekly at the Football Supporters Association Awards, and every year they win it, and rightly so. Max and Barry are a highly entertaining, laconic pair, but also cover some serious topics.
Well, Kieran Maguire, thank you so much for being a guest on Here Comes Pod and sharing experiences from a fascinating career. And for listeners to Here Comes Pod, if you want to know more about the business of the beautiful game and be entertained in the process, you should definitely sign up for the Price of Football podcast.
Thank you so much, Danny, for the invite. Really enjoyed it.